I woke up to the kind of noise that makes a person think they're either still dreaming or have been teleported into a construction site overnight. A relentless, metallic clang-clang, the deep rumble of heavy machinery, and, was that, laughing? My farm wasn't exactly a hub of activity outside of me and the few hands I hired for seasonal work, so hearing what sounded like a full-scale project underway made my stomach drop. I scrambled out of bed, threw on my boots and practically ran outside, expecting maybe a broken fence or a collapsed barn wall. But no. Oh no, it was something far worse. Right there, smack in the middle of my east field, where I had painstakingly prepared the soil for next season's crops, was a massive, half-dug hole complete with rebar, wooden framing, and workers pouring concrete like they were building the foundations of a new civilization. And standing in the middle of it all, sipping a mimosa under a ridiculous sun hat, was Karen. It took a full 10 seconds for my brain to process what I was seeing. My field. My land. My future crops. And this woman, my brand new neighbor, had decided to build a freaking swimming pool on it. Without asking. Without permission. Like she had just woken up one day, looked at my farm, and thought, oh wow, what a perfect place for my personal luxury resort. My hands clenched into fists as I stormed toward her, my boots kicking up dust. Karen, I said, voice dangerously even, what the hell is this? She barely turned to acknowledge me, lifting her sunglasses with an expression that made it seem like I was inconveniencing her. Oh, morning, farmer, she said in that sing-song voice that people use when they think they're about to charm their way out of consequences. Isn't it fabulous? The workers are making such great progress. She gestured around at the men who, upon seeing me approach, had started slowing down, casting nervous glances my way. I took a deep breath, trying to keep my composure, though the sight of hundreds of gallons of water being pumped into a freshly dug hole on my farm was doing a great job of pushing me straight into madness. Karen, I said again, slower this time, as if talking to an unusually dense toddler, this is my land. You cannot build a pool here. She actually had the nerve to laugh. Oh, relax, she said, waving a dismissive hand. We needed a spot with the best sunlight, and your farm has so much land. It's not like you were using this patch for anything important. Besides, don't farmers like, I don't know, irrigation or whatever? She laughed again, as if she had just told the funniest joke in the world. I stared at her, feeling my blood pressure spike. Irrigation? I repeated, voice dangerously low. You think this? I gestured wildly at the hole, the construction equipment, the absurdity of the entire situation. You think this is irrigation? She rolled her eyes, clearly annoyed that I wasn't marveling at her ingenuity. Well, my husband and I wanted a pool, she said, taking another leisurely sip of her mimosa. And honestly, farmer, wouldn't it be nice to have a little neighborhood luxury? You could even use it sometimes. I had to physically stop myself from combusting on the spot. I don't want a pool, I said, gritting my teeth. I want my land back. Karen sighed like I was the unreasonable one. Look, the construction is almost done, and I already sent out invitations for our pool party next weekend, she said. It would just be so awkward to stop now. I mean, think of the social impact. You wouldn't want to be the mean neighbor, would you? I blinked. Karen, I said slowly, you built an entire in-ground pool on my farm without asking, and you're throwing a party? She grinned, as if she had just executed the most brilliant maneuver in human history. Of course. It'll be a welcome to the neighborhood celebration. You should come, bring some of that homemade cider of yours. My brain short-circuited. I looked at her, this woman who had literally invaded my land, destroyed a perfectly good planting field, dumped thousands of dollars into a pool that wasn't even on her property, and then had the gall to act like I was the one being difficult. Every fiber of my being screamed to just start throwing things, her stupid sun hat, her drink, maybe even her into the half-filled pool, but instead, I took a deep breath and forced a smile. You know what, Karen? I said, my voice dripping with a level of calm that even I didn't trust. You're right. This is a great idea. Why don't we have a real grand opening for your pool? She beamed, clearly oblivious to the storm brewing behind my eyes. Oh, I knew you'd come around. I'll send you the full invite later. It's going to be spectacular. I turned on my heel and walked away before I could say something that would put me in jail. But if she thought for 1 second that this pool was going to survive the week, she had another thing coming. I spent the rest of the day pacing, fuming, and debating exactly how nuclear I wanted to go on Karen and her stolen swimming pool. The audacity of it all burned in my chest like a wildfire. She had not only taken over my land without permission, but she had the gall to act like she was doing me a favor. A pool party? Invitations? As if this was some kind of grand neighborhood gift instead of a blatant invasion of my property. I wanted to drive straight to the courthouse and slap her with every legal charge imaginable, but patience, I told myself. Karen was arrogant, reckless, and completely convinced of her own untouchability. People like that didn't anticipate consequences until it was far too late. Instead of storming back over there with a flamethrower, I did the next best thing. I called my lawyer. My lawyer, an older man named Peterson, listened with a level of disbelief that I could practically hear through the phone. "Let me get this straight," he said after I finished explaining. "Your neighbor built a fully in-ground pool on your farm, without permission, and she just expects you to accept it?" I could hear him rubbing his temples. "This is a lawsuit waiting to happen." I clenched my jaw, watching from my window as Karen strutted around her illegally constructed paradise, giving orders to the workers like some kind of monarch overseeing her kingdom. "I don't want to drag this out in court if I don't have to," I said. "I just want her off my land and her mess cleaned up." Peterson sighed. "Well, the first step is a formal legal notice. We'll draft a cease and desist letter today, and she'll have 7 days to comply. If she ignores it, we take further legal action." 7 days. 7 days of watching that monstrosity sit there, soaking up the sun, while Karen probably planned a ridiculous menu of overpriced cocktails and poolside finger foods. I didn't trust her to take the letter seriously, but at least I was setting the groundwork for when she inevitably pushed me too far. The next morning, I personally delivered the letter. I knocked on her door, legal papers in hand, and waited as she took her sweet time answering. When she finally opened it, her expression flickered between confusion and irritation. "Oh," she said, not even pretending to be friendly anymore. "What do you want?" I handed her the letter, keeping my face unreadable. "Official notice. You have 7 days to remove the pool from my land before I take legal action." She took the papers, glancing at them as if they were some minor inconvenience, then actually rolled her eyes. "Oh, please," she scoffed. "You're really making a big deal out of this, aren't you?" My fingers twitched. "Karen," I said, forcing my voice to remain steady, "you are trespassing. You built an entire swimming pool on land that does not belong to you. This is not a disagreement. This is illegal." She let out an exaggerated sigh, tossing the papers onto a nearby table like they were junk mail. "I'll have my husband look at it later," she said dismissively. "But honestly, why don't you just let it go? What's the harm? We're neighbors." I stared at her, stunned at just how deep her entitlement ran. "You have 7 days," I repeated. "After that, this goes to court." Karen gave me a slow, patronizing smile, the kind that made me want to flip her entire house upside down. "Sure, sure," she said, waving a hand. "We'll see what happens." I left before I did something regrettable, but I knew that she wasn't taking me seriously. And sure enough, the next few days confirmed it. Not only did she not halt construction, but she accelerated it. More workers arrived, more materials were brought in, and by the 3rd day, the pool was practically finished. And to top it all off, Karen had the audacity to throw a pre-party celebration. I saw it all from my porch, her and her insufferable friends sipping drinks in lounge chairs, splashing around in my stolen water, laughing like they had won some great victory. She didn't even try to hide it. She wanted me to see. She wanted to rub it in. That was the moment I decided that playing nice was over. If Karen wanted a war, she was going to get one. I started small. A few passive-aggressive nuisances to make her pool a little less enjoyable. First, I tossed in a few bags of bath bombs. Harmless, sure, but they turned the water into a murky, foamy mess. The next day, I accidentally let some of my pigs wander too close, and wouldn't you know it, a few of them got a little too interested in the poolside snacks. Karen screeched like a banshee when she found a muddy hoofprint on one of her lounge chairs. But even those minor inconveniences weren't enough to shake her. If anything, she seemed more determined to win. I overheard her telling one of her guests that she was considering hiring security to keep the crazy farmer away from the property. That was when I realized I had to escalate. The night before her so-called grand opening, I decided it was time for Karen to face the consequences. I made a few calls, got everything in order, and waited for the perfect moment. When the clock struck midnight, I made my move. While the rest of the world slept, I took action. Karen had built her little empire on stolen land, but she had made one critical mistake. She assumed I wouldn't fight back. That was about to change. The night air was crisp, and the only sound that filled the farm was the distant hum of crickets and the soft rustling of the trees. It was the perfect setting for what I had planned. Karen had gone to bed, probably dreaming of her big, ridiculous pool party scheduled for the next day, where she'd stand in her stolen luxury, sipping champagne and bragging about how she'd gotten exactly what she wanted. But she had made a fatal miscalculation. She had built her little oasis on someone else's land, and tonight, she was going to learn exactly what that meant. I had rented a heavy-duty water pump earlier that day, and now it sat at the edge of the pool, a hulking piece of machinery ready to drain every last drop of water from that illegal monstrosity. I started it up. The low mechanical were sending a thrill of satisfaction through me as I watched the water begin to siphon out, flowing away from my land and into the drainage ditch at the edge of my property. It wasn't a quick process, but it was steady, relentless, just like my patience had been up until this point. I leaned against the fence, arms crossed, watching as the water level dropped inch by inch, picturing Karen's reaction when she woke up to find her grand masterpiece reduced to nothing but an empty hole in the ground. The sun had barely begun to rise when the inevitable explosion of noise erupted from Karen's house. I heard the shriek first, high-pitched and furious, followed by the slamming of doors and the sound of bare feet smacking against pavement as she ran outside. The second she laid eyes on her empty pool, she let out a sound that could have shattered glass. "No, no, and no. What happened?" she screamed, hands clutching at her head like she had just discovered a crime scene. I sipped my coffee leisurely from my porch, enjoying the show as she stomped around in her robe, staring into the abyss of what used to be her illegally claimed water haven. Then, as if on cue, she spun toward my house, her face twisted into pure rage. "You!" she screeched, pointing an accusatory finger at me as if I were the villain in this scenario. "What did you do? Where is my water?" I stood up, stretching a little for dramatic effect before walking over to the fence. "Oh, you mean the water that was illegally sitting on my land?" I said, voice casual, watching as her face turned red enough to rival a fire truck. "Yeah, I drained it." "You're welcome." Karen's jaw practically unhinged as she sputtered, trying to form words but too blinded by fury to string together a coherent sentence. Finally, she stomped her foot like an overgrown toddler and screamed, "You can't just do that. That's my pool." I raised an eyebrow. "On my land," I reminded her. "Which means it was my water, technically. And I didn't recall giving you permission to flood my property with your personal resort." She let out a frustrated screech, pacing in a small circle before whipping out her phone. "I'm calling the police," she declared triumphantly, as if she had just revealed some masterstroke of a plan. "You destroyed my property, and you're going to pay for it." I shrugged, leaning against the fence post with an air of utter boredom. "Go ahead," I said. "Just make sure they bring the property survey map when they get here." That seemed to rattle her, because for a split second she hesitated. But then, her stubborn entitlement kicked in, and she jabbed at her phone, loudly announcing to the dispatcher that she was the victim of a heinous crime. It didn't take long for the cops to arrive, given that our little town wasn't exactly a hub of criminal activity. When they pulled up, I greeted them with a friendly nod while Karen launched into a dramatic retelling of how I had maliciously sabotaged her property and destroyed her beautiful pool out of jealousy. She even managed to work up some crocodile tears, dabbing at her eyes like she was starring in a courtroom drama. The officers listened patiently, nodding at the appropriate moments, and then turned to me. "Mind telling us your side of things?" one of them asked, clearly already skeptical of Karen's version of events. I handed them the legal notice that I had served her, the property deed, and the survey map clearly marking the boundary lines. "She built a pool on my land without permission," I explained. "I gave her legal notice to remove it. She ignored it. So, I removed the water myself." The officers flipped through the documents, their expressions shifting from neutral to barely concealed amusement as they pieced together the absurdity of the situation. Karen, realizing that things were not going in her favor, crossed her arms tightly and glared at them. "Well," she demanded, "aren't you going to arrest him? He destroyed my property." One of the officers let out a small sigh before shaking his head. "Ma'am," he said, voice laced with patience that was clearly wearing thin, "your pool was built on his property. That makes it trespassing. And since he followed legal procedure before taking action, he was well within his rights to drain it." Karen's mouth fell open like a fish gasping for air. But that's not fair," she wailed. "It's already built. We've used it." The officer shrugged. "That doesn't change the fact that it was built illegally. You're actually lucky he didn't sue you for damages." I watched as reality finally started to sink in for her. She had spent weeks gloating, mocking me, acting like she was untouchable. And now, in the span of a single morning, her entire scheme had collapsed around her. But, true to Karen nature, she wasn't ready to admit defeat just yet. "Well, we're taking this to court," she snapped, trying to salvage the last shreds of her ego. "You'll be hearing from my lawyer." I shrugged again, unfazed. "Good luck with that." And with that, I turned on my heel and walked back toward my house, leaving her fuming in the aftermath of her own arrogance. As expected, Karen never actually followed through with her threat. Whether it was because she knew she had no legal standing or because she realized how ridiculous she would look, I never found out. Within the next few weeks, she and her husband were forced to remove the entire pool, filling in the hole and restoring the land to its original state, at their own expense. Watching the construction workers rip out what they had so smugly installed was nothing short of poetic justice. And the best part? I got to enjoy every second of it from my porch, sipping my coffee, basking in the sweet, satisfying silence of my land, free of stolen pools and entitled neighbors.